You are now listening to the Select Gaming Podcast.
Dusty, I want to chat a bit with you today about the state of emulation and backwards compatibility in general on the sort of modern slate of consoles. Because it's hard to imagine now that the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox Series X and Series S are 3 years old, which seems incredibly wild to me. And the Nintendo Switch now is verging on 7 years old. So we're starting to approach the point where questions about emulation are starting to kick in. Certainly for the Xbox, which has had a recent history of the console being able to play to install emulators on the Xbox through in retail mode by downloading by downloading RetroArch and other packages through the Xbox store, and that's recently been disabled. And I have a sense in that this generation, and you can correct me if you think I'm off base here, that we're starting to get into the sort of the old-fashioned nasty days when video game companies were particularly vehement about fighting back against emulation. I feel like we're living in that era again. I remember Microsoft. I remember Nintendo having a particularly strong stance against Nintendo 64 emulation and going after, amongst other things, some of the developers of those emulators. And now Nintendo is becoming increasingly aggressive, even with conversations about emulating Switch games on PC. These games running on 7-year-old consoles. Basically, I don't think it runs on the consoles, but a fairly modern an M1 MacBook is probably strong enough to emulate the Switch games better than the Switch could run it themselves. Sony hasn't really had a hand in this game, mostly because we've just been dying for them to put out backwards compatibility for the PS3 on the PS5, which should be possible now. But I just have a feeling that we're sort of there was a period of a bit of a détente between people in the emulation community and the major hardware manufacturers. And you were talking to me about even possibly getting an Xbox Series X for the possibility of playing emulated games on it in addition to the Xbox games. But I feel like that those days are coming to an end, and I mourn the end of that. It felt like we were in a good place, and I feel like that's starting to end.
This whole thing with emulation, specifically on the most recent Xbox console. So is this something that they are actively going after and trying to dismantle? Like, is this something where they're like, okay, guys, the jig is up. You can't do this anymore. We let it slide, but we're losing money. This party's coming to an end. Like, are they actively going after this?
It's unclear exactly what their motivations are, but essentially you were able to download an emulation package, a package of emulators off of the Xbox store in retail mode, and then use that package to read files off of a USB hard drive so that you could play, amongst other things, Sega Saturn games or Nintendo GameCube games, using the power of the consoles to output in a convenient form factor. And what the recent decision was that they were going to block the possibility of you doing that in retail mode. There was still the possibility of you playing these games in developer mode, which I'll just say to any sort of like older gamers who are shocked at the idea of a console having developer mode. Like, yeah, me too. Developer mode is like you pay a license so that basically any Xbox console can be turned into something close to a development kit, so that if you're an independent developer, that you could use that in order to make games for it. And what developer kit allowed you to do, amongst other things, was run code of these emulators. And so for a period of time, you could do that. You could still, even after Microsoft in the past couple of weeks have delisted these emulators off of the Microsoft store, you could nevertheless still do that on developer mode. And what's happened recently is that actually developers have found a workaround to put the emulators back on the retail side of things, so that you don't need to have a developer account. It's something like you pay a $2 subscription to someone's Patreon, and they add your email to a white list of emails of users that are able to use these products. So it's not quite that the emulation that that you've expressed an interest to, like, oh, maybe I'll get this in order to finally play some Sega Saturn games in an easy way. And so it's not impossible, but it's just that extra hurdle now that I think is that Microsoft is hoping, and it's purely speculation on my part. But I'm assuming that part of the reason is that they don't really love the idea of you playing Xbox 360 games that you downloaded onto your hard drive, playing it using the unofficial emulators on their own console.
With every sort of next era of consoles, for me, since the PlayStation, one of the reasons why the PlayStation was so successful was because of the sole fact that it was easy to mod, and then you could do these burnt games, and you could play them, and they worked. And ever since then, it's always been this thing for me personally where I'm like, oh, I wonder, like, with this next era of consoles, what's going to be the next console that's going to, like, get modded, or like you can do emulation through, that's going to make it the easiest. And it's going to be like this secret amongst gamers where they're going to gravitate towards this because it's like, this Xbox, you can do this, this, and that. And that sells hardware. And I think it's like, so with the era of like the PlayStation, Nintendo 64, Sega Saturn, like the PlayStation was king for being modded, right? And then you had the next era, and then weirdly enough, it was like the Sega Dreamcast was like the system where like, hey, you can burn a game and you don't even need a chip. You can just play this game, right? And it was like these crazy secrets that only these hardcore, just gamers knew about it. If you gamed, you knew about these things, right? With this Xbox Series X and this era of consoles, weirdly enough, I was kind of hoping that the Xbox Series X was going to be like this console, that it was going to be this sort of strangely welcoming console that, hey, you can mod it, and hey, you can play emulated games easily. And, for me, it was going to be this thing where I don't own a PS5 yet, okay? But the things that you told me and the things that I have been seeing online about this console being able to be modded and have emulation being run through it, I would get an Xbox Series X over a PS5 right now solely because of this. And hey, I may even end up getting an Xbox game while I'm at it, just to have something easy to play. And then I could have Game Pass and so on and so forth. So it's like these companies cannot live off of emulation and their things being modded. But the thing is, one of the reasons why the PS1 excelled the way it did was because it was able to be modded in the way that it was. Is it something that, should they turn their head away and look into the other corner and just be like, hey guys, we're not looking because we have enough money already, and if this is going to get gamers to buy this console, then why not?
I think that there's a real misunderstanding as to just how much brand loyalty in the console market has been able to seriously give console manufacturers the edge in hardware sales, like long-standing loyalty. I will say that I was sort of bewildered as to why Microsoft didn't do the thing that you and I would kill for, which is to say, with the Xbox Series X generation of console, you can enjoy every game published in Xbox history. Obviously, that these consoles are able to run these titles, right? Like, it has full backwards compatibility with the Xbox One X, which with the Xbox One consoles and their games. And I'll never forgive Microsoft for messing up those stupid names. They were so good before that. X360, could have called it Xbox 3, Xbox 4. No, they called it Xbox One.
I know. Huge. That totally confused me. That's why I just asked you what was the name of the next current Xbox console. I think that hurt them. I think that hurt them significantly.
That promise of having a box that'll be able to play all your games, and of course it won't be able to play the Sony exclusives, of course it won't be able to play the Nintendo exclusives, but it's the idea of being able to play, like, hey, you want to play a Halo game that you found?
Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
And you know what, it's actually rather nearsighted for Microsoft as well, in this very limited way, creating the market conditions that like retro game stores can thrive, and GameStop, as much as they're just another faceless corporation, that they could survive by bringing back, like, they'll start giving you a couple extra bucks for your trade-ins of Xbox 360 games, because they're able to sell them. Because hey, you want to play all the Halo games, you can do that now on your new Xbox. And that's a real missed opportunity. But I do think I think simultaneously we're getting closer to that, but I don't think it's coming. It's going to be coming from the console manufacturers. As sad as I am to say that, I think the closest we're going to get to that. I think one of the worst things that these manufacturers could do is go toe to toe with game developers and hobbyists who, in their spare time, love breaking apart the security of consoles just for the fun of it and just out of spite. It's all speculation on my part, but after I saw that these emulation developers had a workaround to get the Xbox the emulation package back up on retail through Microsoft's own servers, I did have one of those moments where it just reminded me of the GeoHot Linux on PS3 saga. I do think that sometimes, you said, is it best that they just look away from this? And, there's clear instances in which manufacturers might not be in their benefit to look away from it. Sega and the Dreamcast was one such example. I really think Nintendo should turn the other way and not acknowledge the people running the Switch games on PC via emulation. I really think they shouldn't acknowledge that, for their own benefit, not for anyone else's. And I really, really think Microsoft should continue to have a soft hand on this, because it'd be a real shame if something happened to that Xbox, the security on the Xbox Series X, and people all of a sudden were able to root the console and get kernel access and run unsigned code. It'd be a real shame if people were able to use network access to run ISOs of Xbox Series X games and no longer need to subscribe to Game Pass. Look, all these consoles have a lifespan, and 90% of what we do on the Select is emulation, because that's the best way for us to play some of these modern games in a convenient way and bring those games to people who watch this channel. So it's going to be a matter of time. Do these console manufacturers want to curry the goodwill in the meantime, or do they want to try to go swinging against hackers who are going after you out of spite? Seems like a fight they won't win.
In anything, you have to pick your battles. And with regards to the sort of the three big consoles right now, Nintendo Switch, PS5, Series S, something that Microsoft, in my opinion, is just kind of severely lacking right now is when the original Xbox came out, I always viewed it as this sort of PC in a box, right?
Yeah, totally.
You had the PlayStation, you had the Nintendo, and I always thought that they were very similar in their approach of like a console and the games that they were coming out with. And then you kind of had Microsoft, who was not an outsider to the market per se, but like an outsider to the video game console market. And I always thought to myself, Microsoft is bringing what I would imagine PC gaming would be like, because I couldn't have a PC that was strong enough to have these games, but I always viewed it as that, right? Where I'm like, Microsoft is they're kind of giving you a little bit of both console gaming and what PC gaming should be. And right now, I feel like Microsoft is they're trying too hard to be the next PS5. And I think that's a big reason as to why they're failing. Nintendo does what they do best. They give you their formula, the Mario Karts, the Mario Parties, the new Mario game, the Zelda, and then they call it a day. And Sony, they give you a couple of the things that you know and love, and they'll give you some new IPs. With Microsoft, I really don't know what they're offering right now aside from like Game Pass. The Game Pass thing is a very controversial thing right now because it's still young. We don't really know if it's going to work out the way that it's being promised, right?
And at the current price, which is astonishingly good.
Yeah, so it's like the thing with this emulation and like what you were telling me about with this new Microsoft console was I kind of got excited because I'm like, you're kind of offering something to me that these other two aren't right now. In my life, I'm kind of excited about, like, I want to play Sega Saturn games. I want to play old Xbox games. I think there has got to be some point in sometimes it's okay to turn your eyes away as long as your intellectual property is not being destroyed or manipulated in a way that you don't see fit. It's like, why not let people be able to emulate Blinks the Time Sweeper on a console? You know what I mean? Like, why are you upset if people are emulating Sega Saturn games? That company don't even exist anymore. It's not hurting anybody at this point. I don't know. I was excited about the potential of getting a new Xbox because of this, and maybe that would have pulled me into discovering some new games on the Xbox or Xbox properties, but I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird thing to say because I mean, I get it, but it's Microsoft and they're worth billions of dollars. And for like the 10% of people who are doing this, does it really matter?
I guess I think the thing is that that's exactly it. And it's like I could totally see you purchasing an Xbox Series X in order to live those console generations on the Xbox side that you didn't really play. And dude, there's like, as someone who was primarily an Xbox gamer for a couple generations there's loads of amazing games to experience. And here's the thing, I have, like just off screen there, you can see I have loads of Xbox games that I'd be more than happy to let you borrow. If the console manufacturers aren't going to turn a blind eye, as it were, and allow these possibilities to happen in terms of emulation, in terms of backwards compatibility, well, then we'll figure it out ourselves, and then we'll benefit from it without them benefiting from it. And I don't mind that at all. I just think it's a real shame because it seems to me such low-hanging fruit because your console is already capable of doing these things. It's kind of embarrassing that the hobbyists need to show the console developers how to do things and do them right. And I will say this also, as much as I think this generation is really young, and frankly, I even said this about the last generation. I wasn't really ready for the PS5 to launch, even though I do love my PS5 and I use it almost every night now. In a sense, I kind of can't wait for this generation to slowly recede from memory, because I think that these consoles for the first time are really powerful enough that they'll be able to, once Microsoft turns a blind eye to the Series X and the hackers get in and make this the ultimate console and make and fulfill the promise that the hardware allows. I don't think that there will be a better way to play every single game in Xbox history than on the Series X. But unfortunately, that's despite what Microsoft wants you to do with that console.
Thank you for tuning into the Select Gaming Podcast. Like, share, and subscribe. We create videos for the Select Gaming that are guided by our personal interests, and your support makes that possible.